Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 6:30. We'll start the meeting. This is a meeting of the Development Control Committee, and welcome to members of the public and applicants and objectors who have taken the trouble to be with us this evening. I'll explain the process of the committee when we get to the appropriate point in the agenda. Firstly, I'm required to draw your attention to the fact that we are not expecting a practice fire alarm this evening, so if there is something that sounds remotely like a fire alarm, it is a fire alarm, or we'll assume it's a fire alarm, and we'll all make our way via the exits. There's one there and there's one here. If you have signed in to the building, if your name is on a list of people who are here, don't rush away, just wait in the cold, for we'll try and make it no more than a minute and a half while we make sure that all the people who were in the building have left the building. That's quite important, otherwise we'll have people searching for you high and low. It hasn't happened so far in a development control meeting that we had that, so just in case. We've got a little bit of administration to go through. Firstly, and then we'll get to the applications, and I'll explain the process when we get there. Those of you who are in the public rows there, there are two documents before the committee. One is the officer report on each of the objections, quite a big thick wodge, and the other is a thing called the update paper. So that those are the documents that the committee will be looking at during the course of the evening. The meeting will be webcast, and I noticed nobody's had the courage to sit in the front row where the seats say, if you sit in the front row, you may appear on the web. But if you come forward to speak, you will appear on the web. There's no ducking that one. You will be on the webcast. Apologies for absence.
Chairman, can I just apologise? No, he's not here yet. Councillor Round is on his way.
Thank you.
Okay, for late.
Resignations and replacements. Keith?
I'm representing Councillor Hussey.
Thank you. Any other resignations, replacements? Thank you. Declarations of interest. Diane?
Thank you, Chair. The last application on the agenda, I haven't got the number at the moment, I'll tell you, it's the Rose Cottage, Dummer 1. I'll be withdrawing from the committee and taking my 4 minutes as the ward councillor. I'll explain more when the time comes.
Right, but that's because you have an opinion on the...
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Any other declaration of interest? There are no urgent items and announcements. The minutes of the last meeting, are there any... Terry? I'll get more formal in a minute when I remember people's surnames.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a query, really. It mentions that I declared an interest on item 10, which I did, but I was told that I didn't actually need to, and then I could participate in the vote, which I did. So I don't know whether it stands as a declaration or not.
I think unless somebody objects, we'll rule that out so that you didn't. Otherwise it will look peculiar. Any other comments? Happy to move. I shall sign the minutes on your behalf. It's the 16th today. I brought my own pen. There are no referrals from other committees or from the council. There are no issues referred by the cabinet. Therefore, we move on to the main business of the meeting, which is the planning applications. I'm going to start with number 1 on your agenda, land forming part of Binfields Farm Lane, Chinham, in Chinham Ward, and we have objecting. Do we take objectors first? And yes, the parish council, Councillor Thornton would like to come forward, please, and sit at the desk there. And then we will ask the officers to introduce the item and their report and any update. And then you will have 4 minutes to speak. And then after that, I have Mr. Hepwood of Miller Homes. Is Mr. Hepwood here? You will speak immediately after that. Officers, please introduce the report.
Item 1 is the proposed erection of 12 number 1, 2, 4 and 5 bed dwellings, the creation of new accesses. I do apologise, can you hear me now? Is that better? Okay, it's the proposed erection of 12 number 1, 2, 4 and 5 bed dwellings, the creation of new accesses and associated works. During members' site visit, clarification was sought as to the potential overlooking of the proposed dwellings from the approved extension to the adjoining hotel, if and when this is built, the classification of Binfields Farm Lane, and the parking taking place in the lay-by by the school that was observed at the day of the site visit. In response to these items, given the ground level differences between the application site and the hotel, in combination with the separation distance of 90 metres to the nearest proposed dwelling and the approved extension of the hotel, it's not considered that this would give rise to an adverse relationship. Binfields Farm Lane is not a classified road, but it is an adopted highway, and there are no formal parking restrictions within the lay-by. A further letter of objection has been received today from the Binfields School. Its content reflects the matters that were raised in the original letter of objection received and noted in the main report, and there is a correction to the wording of condition 11 in the main report to note in that it should read private dwelling houses in place of private dwelling house. The recommendation is to approve subject to conditions and a legal agreement being entered into in the terms set out in the main report.
Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, Chairman. Chinham Parish Council objects to this proposal, not the principle of residential development on the site, but the access onto Binfields Farm Lane. Binfields Farm Lane is certainly not a normal suburban street with pinch points, a height restriction barrier, and for most of its length, because it's of its proximity to the school, it has got parking restrictions. And we feel that 2 access points onto the road for only a dozen houses seems excessive. And the positioning of them, particularly the southerly one, which is almost directly opposite the entrance to the school. And we feel that this is going to cause unnecessary extra trouble with parking and access during the always congested times when schools are coming in and out. I mean, we know that there is always inevitably, wherever there's a school, there are parking and access problems at the school in times of the school run. But 2 access points positioned as they are on this proposal would seem to us to exacerbate the problem and make it worse. And we would ask that the plan be changed so that the access point, a single access point for that number of houses, and be positioned really as far away as possible from the school entrance. Now, we were hoping that it would be possible to have this access to go north to the small roundabout there, but there are issues of land ownership and whatnot, which obviously don't concern us as a parish council. So on the grounds of access, on the grounds of the inevitable increased trouble with traffic congestion and the associated inevitable problems with the school access, we would ask the committee to refuse this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Just President, as you stay there for a moment, do members have any questions for the parish councillor? Thank you, Councillor Thornton. If we could have Mr. Hepwood, please. You're going to press your one. You have 4 minutes.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The application before you has been subject to extensive discussion and consultation, including pre-application meetings with your officers. The current application addresses a number of comments made by the officers on a previous application, which the company withdrew in June last year. I'm aware of the concerns raised by the parish council and councillors Miller, Bierman and Still relating to the location of access points, traffic and the architectural merits of the proposed development, and I'd like to highlight a number of key points in support of our proposals. The application fully accords with national and local planning policy, and the application has an unequivocal recommendation from your officers as set out in the comprehensive committee report before you. The report confirms that no objections were received from, most importantly, highways, no objections from planning policy, and no objections on urban design issues. The site has been identified for development for over a decade and lies within the Basingstoke policy boundary. The proposal would provide a number of benefits. It provides a much needed range of houses, including lifetime mobility homes. The proposal also provides an opportunity to bring into productive use an underutilised and unkempt area of land, and the proposals retain an existing woodland belt on the southern boundary. In addition, the proposals will increase surveillance on the approach to the school. With regard to the access, which is an important point, I can confirm that Miller Homes have looked at a single access point, but we've rejected it for the following reasons. Firstly, it would require a long access drive, which would be likely to result in residents parking on Binfields Lane. And at school opening and closing times, I'd suggest that parents dropping children to and from the school would park on development. In addition to that, a single access would require either land outside our control or the loss of part of the woodland belt. In summary, the alternative really isn't an option to us. I've just heard the parish council, and I can confirm that height restriction barrier would go, so that would change. With regard to the architectural merit of the proposals, I'd reiterate the comments on page 7 of the report, where the officer states that the proposal would be in keeping with the surrounding development, and that the proposed dwellings are not considered to be unimaginative. I'd like to conclude by drawing your attention to paragraph 14 of the National Planning Policy Framework, which states, at the heart of the NPPF is a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and in decision making this means approving development proposals that accord with the development plan without delay, and where a development plan is absent, silent, or relevant policies are out of date, granting planning permission should be forthcoming unless any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the NPPF as a whole. In summary, I maintain that there are no valid planning reasons to refuse this application.
Thank you. If you could just press your big black button again. Members, any questions for Mr. Hepwood? Yes, David? Sorry, Councillor Potter. I'll try and get this right.
No problem, Chairman. Thank you. I'm very happy with David. If that's the informality of the meeting tonight, that's fine. Could I just ask Mr. Hepwood a couple of things about the vehicular access? I mean, I took part in the site visit last Friday, and as with other members, saw what you've been describing this evening, and I do have some sympathy, I have to say, with the local members and the parish council that are concerned about the conflict with the access to the school. I mean, I think it is a special site because of that. So I know this is a preamble. I know what you said about all of the discussions that have taken place, but it does seem to me potentially that if there was only one vehicular access in the position that the second one is shown, sorry, the furthest one from the school is shown, and the orientation of the 4 dwellings was changed so that the back gardens become the front gardens in the way that I can see it on the plan. It does seem to me that's possible. I mean, I can understand the sort of preferential design that you've come forward with, but quite frankly, having regard to the other issues, I would have thought what I'm saying now clearly could work, and I would have thought that would satisfy the major aspect of there being vehicular access to this site right opposite the school site access, or nearly right opposite. I mean, I guess you've considered that, and I don't see that necessarily conflict with the woodland area, if I could just finish with this point, because clearly the distances are the same. I mean, all you're doing is having the road at the front elevation of the 4 dwellings I'm talking about leading into this main access to the rest of the site. I mean, where people park casually when they're bringing their children to school, quite frankly, is not affected by whether you've got one access or two, it seems to me. And to overcome the main concern, I mean, really, could you not consider that as an alternative design for this site?
Yes, I mean, to answer your question, we have looked at a whole host of options. We've been discussing this site with officers for almost 2 years, and the number of iterations that we've looked at include. I think one of the key things here is that the urban design side, space about dwellings, spacing, distances, that they all contribute to the layout of a site, and we have actually looked at, as I said in my earlier statement, that we've looked at single access points. It really doesn't work for us. This site, albeit it's a small site for Miller Homes, we're a large house builder, it's nevertheless a very important site to us in Basingstoke, where we have a regional office, and we're very keen to work with the council where we can. And we have explored a lot of alternatives for this one, but we just can't find the solution that provides a viable site for us and achieves a single access.
Councillor Miller?
Thank you, Chair. You came out with something that I hadn't heard before, and you said that the height restriction barrier would be removed. I'll be asking a question of officers about this later on, but this is the first I've heard of it, because I understand that height restriction barrier there was to prevent the access for excessively large vehicles.
Yeah, if I can just respond to that. My understanding is that the barrier was introduced to prevent travellers from accessing the vacant land. My understanding is, having had discussions with the officers, that they are content for it to be removed.
Thank you.
The Tomlin?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Mr. Hepworth, really just a brief question. Have Miller Homes explored the use of that land to the north? I know it's outside of your ownership, but in trying to solve this, have you looked at that and discussed that with the owner?
My understanding was that those discussions did take place some time ago, but we've had it reconfirmed to us that that land isn't available. So I really don't. I think it's a bit of a red herring to actually go there.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Hepworth. Questions to the officers? Mr. Miller?
Yeah, I'd like to ask, what's the land that currently is being considered by Miller's Home has a bund along it, which we've adopted as a practice elsewhere in the borough to stop unlawful trespass. I suppose it's probably the best expression for people who want to squat on the land. There is an unused part at the top end of Great Burnfields Farm Lane. Isn't that going to be as vulnerable as the bigger area? You know, in other words, the height restriction should still apply?
Before you answer that, could somebody indicate on the chart, for those of us who didn't go on the site visit, where we are with, where is the height restriction entrance? To what, please? It's right. It's into the proposed dwellings. Yes. Am I right? Where that's indicated, it's
Yes,
access to the proposed dwellings.
Councillor, it's between the locations of the two proposed accesses.
So does that access get closed entirely then?
Condition 5 is the one referring to works that have to be permitted by the county council, as they are the highway authority. That includes the relocation of the height barrier. They've considered that they would look to relocate it further north into the site following this development if it was approved. So it would then still control access beyond the relocated height barrier point to the rest of the site.
To the part of the land that is not within the red boundary, just for clarity.
Yes, in actually probably closer towards the roundabout, but towards the north end of the red line, yes.
Sorry, I should have been prepared. My question too is for highways, if I may. If this is granted, and what happens that is being thought would happen by the local parish, have you any suggestions as to how you would get over the problem that is made by there being this problem of the access, the one access, and the school as well? Have you got any thoughts as to how you'd be able to get over it if it does happen?
As I understand it, the parish were concerned about the southern access. That is the one where there's double yellow lines on one side of the road and school keep clear markings on the other side of the road. So there shouldn't be any parking there at all. So any that does occur is illegal. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but it's all illegal. The design of the accesses, both of the accesses, would allow for two-way movements and for visibility of both the roads and the footpaths.
So I assume we'd be relying on the police to monitor what was going on the double yellow lines.
It's our own authority, it's decriminalised, so it's our own traffic wardens that do that.
We talked about the height restriction barriers in place, and you've confirmed that it would be moved, and that's moved further down. So now that will expose the parking area outside the school to some levels of sort of unauthorised parking by, should we say, commercial vehicles or even possibly travelling people. Are you concerned about the fact that that's I assume that's a highway land? So how will you protect it?
As it's adopted highway, as it's adopted highway, it's quite unusual for there to be a height barrier across the road anyway. In the circumstances, this is an extraordinary occurrence presently. And normally there wouldn't be a height barrier there, so it would be for the county council or our enforcement people to deal with any transgressions.
Yeah, sorry, it must have been there to pick up a specific issue.
I think it's more a case of the county are prepared to let sleeping dogs lie until it causes a problem.
Thank you, Chair. The picture's changed now. It wasn't what I was going to say, but it did show a car that I thought illegally parked, which was fairly apt. But no, my question is actually the question I asked the applicant, I asked the officers. Have any discussions taken place with, I guess, the landowner of that piece of land that's going to be left as a small vacant plot at the north with a roundabout with a sort of head that goes nowhere? For members who perhaps didn't go on the site visit, we've got the Chinham Games area, the Mugger at the top there, and there's going to be a small parcel of land on this development which, well, I couldn't really see what you could actually do with it. And I just wonder whether there have been discussions about mitigating this access problem by actually talking with the county, I assume, as the landowner.
I can offer a little bit of advice, Councillor, from my knowledge of earlier discussions. When the whole of the site was owned by the County Council, the full extent of the land up to the roundabout was included for consideration for housing. At some point before they marketed it, the northernmost part was withdrawn from the development area. I don't know why.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, just on the height barrier, I mean, presumably my understanding would be that it was erected originally to stop travellers getting access onto the very piece of land that now potentially will have 12 houses on it. So it obviously makes sense to move it further north along that road. I mean, it's as simple as that, I guess, isn't it? I just wonder whether the highways officer could help me in regard to coming back to the issue I raised with Miller Homes. I mean, I understand Miller Homes' reluctance, but I mean, would he accept that to have two accesses to a small site involving only 12 houses is, to say the least, unusual, I would have thought, from certainly my experience. And I just wanted to have his comments really about the practicality of what I put to Miller Homes. I mean, it does seem to me, with the single access in the more northerly position only, and quite frankly, for the process to be changed such that that one access gives access to these bottom plots, which I think are probably numbers 1 to 6. I can't quite see really on this small scale, but something akin to that. So that the road is at the front of those dwellings as it is now on the design, and the actual turning space that's allowed, I guess, for refuse lorries and the like anyway, would exist, but the other way around. I mean, it just seems to me that there is nothing impractical about that. Might not be a preferred design, but I can't see there's anything impractical about that, and that could work. In highway terms, I mean, can you just advise me why that couldn't work?
In highway terms, there isn't any reason why it couldn't work. As I recall, one of the early designs, as I was referring to the other councillors, when the full area of the site was considered, showed only one access to the site. It's been a matter of evolution of the design, and particularly the concerns of the site design and the urban design, that has resulted in two accesses. It's not a highways requirement.
No more questions to officers. I'll open it up to discussion.
Where do I get this?
Beg your pardon. Ward councillors. First.
Thank you, Chair. The 3 ward councillors called this in, and one of them, Councillor Beerman, has written something extra that he asked me to present to the committee this evening, as he's currently on a mayoral engagement. It is no exaggeration to suggest that the governors of the Great Binfields School are horrified at the likely conflict between the residential traffic from the proposed development and the everlasting and totally insuppressible vehicles engaged in the school run. I'm quoting word for word. Apart from vehicle movements, as was recently rather graphically demonstrated through an event at the nearby Hampshire Court Hotel, parking conflicts are also likely to arise. That housing is intended on the site will doubtless need to be accepted, albeit fairly dense and thus unhelpful to the above. That the access points are located in the application leaves me incredulous. I would ask that members, at the very minimum, seek a further review of the situation by the Highways Authority, but better still, refuse the application altogether. That is the input from Councillor Beerman. From my own perspective, one thing we've been very concerned about, and in different other fora, it's been discussed within Chinham, is the current lack of school places. I spoke to the head of Great Binfields Lane School this morning to get an update. He's not been able to be here this evening because he's engaged with 3 different representations from the local authority, county as well, that the school is about to be expanded. It was built originally for an extra one-form entry. Those discussions are active as we sit here. And there will be additional, and a completely additional form there, probably before the well, they'd like to do it in temporary buildings before the end of this next school year, which will bring more traffic in as far as the school run is concerned. Effectively, if you want to look at proportions, almost doubling the traffic. The suggestion that there should only be one access, I think, we've taken a look at this and just could not understand why one of those accesses is acceptable opposite the entry to a school. I know this is probably apocryphal, but how can I say it? The conflicts between the residents who are bringing their children to that school over parking and obstruction and everything else started to become legion in Chinham. And that's human nature, I'm afraid. I wouldn't like to get in front of a school mom. Scares the living daylights out of me. Anyway, apart from that, the principle of the development is not at issue, really, as far as we're concerned. It's this access. And we just cannot understand why that access is acceptable to highways. You can quote all the numbers that you like, but I'm afraid we know what happens outside that school with no traffic. Heaven help us with the traffic, albeit fairly light in the terms of the highways calculations, that will come out of there. The reason we all called it in was we were very apprehensive about it, but we wanted the committee to have a look. I'm here tonight to listen to that, and I'll make my mind up on the vote later on. Thank you very much.
If I may, Chair, just to get my comments over with and done, in terms of the design, I don't find it unimaginative, quite frankly. These are subjective things always, but I think it's fine. My inclination, clearly is to support the development. I think, and the parish council, I think, is saying it's inevitable and probably supportable that these units should be built on this piece of land. And the sort of numbers concerned, I hear what Councillor Bierman has said, but I don't think it's high density in that regard, and I think it's probably acceptable. But the issue around the access, I just find the debate in some ways quite bizarre, really, because, we've heard from the highways expert that there isn't any technical reason why a single access can't be a feature, the overriding feature of this site, and I think it should be a single access. And I would have thought, with a little bit of wit, people could go away and have a look at this afresh. I know there's hours gone into this already. I'm hearing this from various people, but quite frankly, if the overriding concern that we have, and I think every reasonable person is having, is about the double access and all of the conflict that Councillor Miller relates to quite properly, and I would have thought we could ask for this to be looked at one more time, and I think it can work. I'm not trying to be pompous in my comments on it, but looking at it, I can see no reason why a design built around a single access with certain orientations being changed can't work. There's clearly no reason. It may not be as preferable to the developer for a number of, quite frankly, sellable reasons when it comes down to it, but with respect, that isn't our primary concern. I think really it's whether the site will work, whether it will work effectively for the people that will live on it and for the people that will have some conflict with it in context of the school opposite. And as Councillor Miller says, if this problem is likely to increase in the future, not decrease, because of the traffic numbers concerned and the traffic management problems with that, I think we should ask for this to be deferred and to go away for a further look at this and to bring it back to us in a slightly amended form with a single access.
Councillor Hood.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very nervous about this one. I listened very carefully to Mr. Hepwood and his comments, and when he said quite rightly from his point of view that they had ticked most boxes, and there is no valid planning reason why this should be refused. I disagree. I think that where you find that the parish council comes along, the 3 ward councillors, bear in mind that they represent the community, raise issues to do with access. I can't see why we would accept this. I would perhaps support what Councillor Potter was suggesting, that we defer this and give the planners and the applicant the opportunity to come up with an answer with regards to access. I think that something in Mrs. Tucker suggested, in a sense, was that if we agreed to this and some child was knocked down, it's no use saying to parents, well, there's no valid reason why we couldn't refuse that. I think that doesn't hold up. I respect the wishes of the ward councillors, and I think we should, under the local community, we should support them when it comes to a case like this, and I certainly would not be supporting this application.
It's been moved for refusal, seconded by...
No, for deferment.
Well, if we defer, I'll just get advice from officers on this, but what it sounds as if we're asking for is a redesign of the site and site layout, which would effectively be an amended application. And I think that, from a technical point of view, that wouldn't be deferring it; it would be refusing it pending receiving. But officers will advise on that.
Thanks, Chair. I think, just picking up on the deferral point first, yes, in theory you could defer the item, as with any decision it need to be coupled with reasons. But just to pick up on some of the points made in the debate, I mean, the issue about the accesses and whether one is better than two or not, I do appreciate there may be views that one is the way forward, but nevertheless there's two proposed in front of you, and on that basis the decision has to be, well, is there a highway safety or a significant highway safety impact from that? It's not to say that there won't be any impact, it's whether the impact is so significant that it would then cause a highway safety concern. I appreciate there'll be different views around that, but the point that the highways officer made in his comments on the application is that from the number of vehicle movements you would get from a scheme of this size, it wouldn't be of such a scale that would cause that highway safety impact. So that's something just to be borne in mind when coming to the decision as to whether to approve, refuse, or defer.
I'm not sure I got a clear steer on my question there. If we defer it, can we expect to get an application with one access, or are we deferring it? Normally defer it for more information, and I'm not sure we're asking for more information. Just to check whether it's deferral or refusal is the sensible thing to... We haven't voted yet, so we don't know, but if this motion were to be approved, would it make sense to defer it, or would it make more sense to refuse it with advice to the applicant to rethink the access issue?
If it was deferred, that could be taken back to the applicant to look at a alternative, and so an alternative scheme could come before you if it's within the... it depends on the nature of the amendments, if you like. If the amendments are so significant because it's now one access and that has a significant impact on layout, then it might be something that goes beyond what you could reasonably expect within one application, so it would be a new application at that stage. I think it's worth mentioning, though, that the applicant obviously doesn't have to look at it again, and they may decide, well, actually, I've heard the comments from the committee, it's been deferred, we'll appeal on non-determination. I'm not saying that's what they will do, but it is something that the members have to be mindful of when coming to that conclusion.
Now, can we be clear what is being proposed? Are we proposing deferral, having heard all that, or refusal? Councillor Potter.
May, Chair. I mean, I didn't formally move it in the context of what I said originally, but I'm happy to do that. And I would propose deferment. And I mean, I understand Mike's comments only too well, really, and I understand where the applicant could go on this, really. I mean, I think they'd be ill-advised to do that, but that's my view. And I genuinely believe that this is resolvable, really, with a little bit of sensible discussion around it. And I know the highway issue is, my view, and it may not be sustainable in terms of actual objective arguments, but it does seem to me there are some really valid concerns here. A lot of people are very concerned about the well-being of people who actually use that road and the school. And as Councillor Hood has said, I think we have an obligation, to take regard to that. I'd ask the parties to go away, look at this once again. I'm not asking for any reduction in the number of units. It doesn't have to be. And quite frankly, it's a road design amendment which actually allows for the houses to face a different way to what they are. And in many ways, I think there's an argument in favour of that, really, when I look at it subjectively. So surely, with a bit of sensible discussion, this thing can be brought back to us in a slightly amended form, singular access, and I think it would probably get the nod from the committee.
Any other speakers? I just wanted to add a comment of my own before we vote on that, and that is that I have a concern for the residents who will move into what I think is the 4 houses served by the access opposite the school. In my own area, we have school access with the usual problems of traffic in a narrow village lane. And it is the case that if you build a house immediately opposite the school entrance, the residents of that house would come to a conclusion pretty quickly that it's rather silly to try leaving my property or coming back to it during school pickup hours. And indeed, where we live, the access to the whole village is such, with 3 schools close by each other, that most people make a point of never leaving or entering the village other than for school delivery purposes during school pickup hours. It just, that becomes a nightmare. And there isn't anything that can be done about it because there's nowhere to put this particular school I'm thinking of has quite big car parking, but there's nothing, it's not nearly adequate, and therefore can't get it. And for the benefit of the applicant, I would say I would never advise anybody to move into any of those 4 houses if the access to the 4 houses is opposite a school entrance. It would not be a nice place to live from that point of view. So I think there are additional considerations there. My own view is that it's safer for the committee to refuse it and seek another application and to have this tested at appeal if the applicant chose to go to appeal, rather than have the applicant go for non-determination. But that's just a personal opinion. I'll now, having said my say, put it to a vote. Those in favour of deferring the application with a view to officers discussing with the applicant the possibility of coming back with a proposal for a site with a single access. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Do we need to add anything, or have you got the note?
Just to confirm, item 1 is going to be deferred.
Just for the note, for the benefit of the applicant, nobody seems to object to the development, nobody seems to object to the number of houses, nobody seems to object strongly to the design or any other aspect, but we do strongly advise that having an access to any development opposite a school entrance is inappropriate and should be avoided at all costs. For the record, I do believe the county has a role in this as the education authority. The school has objected, but the education authority has a duty of care to parents and children. It seems to me if the county is happy to see this sort of thing happen, the county is at fault. We move on to item 2, West Street, Tadley. 2 2-bedroom detached houses, and I have Mr. Mosley and Mr. Perry in support of the application. I don't have any objectors. Is there anybody who wanted to speak as an objector? No, Mr. Mosley and Mr. Perry, then if you'd come forward. And I'll ask officers to introduce the application.
Thank you, Chairman. Item number 2 refers to the erection of 2 detached 2-bedroom houses with access from West Street and parking and landscaping to the front of the dwellings. This application follows an appeal against the refusal of 2 dwellings on the site, which was dismissed. It is considered that this current scheme is of an improved design and layout, and as such has overcome the objections to the previous scheme and is therefore recommended for approval.
Gentlemen, you have 4 minutes between you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to speak on behalf of this application. We'd like to take this opportunity to answer a number of objections that have been submitted, which brings this application before you this evening, in spite of the planning officer being mindful to recommend approval. As you're aware, the site has been subject to a number of recent applications, but working with the planning department, we've come up with a scheme that appears to satisfy the previous reasons for refusal. The following, we hope, answers the objections put before you. Firstly, we address the issue of privacy. The two proposed houses have been designed so that the rear elevation has no windows at first floor level, with the exception of non-openable, obscure glazed bathroom windows. So there can be no overlooking to the property of Hua Hin or the adjacent L-shaped piece of land. The rear of the proposed houses also face the side of Hua Hin and not the immediate amenity space behind the property, with the closest part of the dwellings, house type A, adjacent to number 13, falling in excess of 15 metres from the boundary of Hua Hin. The site, as a whole, is the north side of Hua Hin, and as such, would have no detrimental effect on light levels or loss of sunlight affecting the use of the private amenity space. Problem with water supply to the local area has been reported as an objection. But as far as we're aware, there should have been no significant difference in water pressure, as the approved and constructed new property at 13 West Street has its own connection to the main supply within West Street and is not shared with any other properties in the area. It is proposed the two new dwellings will again have their own dedicated connections, so not adding to any further problems with the supply in the area. Our concerned clients have asked a number of the local neighbours, and it would appear that no one else has been affected by this problem. In addition, the foul drainage from 13 West Street and the proposed two houses connects direct via a previously unused manhole on the plot of land to the mains in West Street, and has no bearing on any drainage from the orchard. It is reported that properties in the orchard are believed to be on a private sewer system that is renowned for collapsing due to its age and construction, possibly giving rise to the problems reported in the objections. It must also be noted that there was no objection from Thames Water, the governing body of this area as well. With regards to the safety concerns, whilst we accept the issues of minor amounts of additional traffic on West Street can directly be connected to the proposed development of this site, the issues in the objection of no pavements and street lighting cannot be attributed solely to this application, and as such form no part of the planning legislation to form an objection to this individual application. In fact, the moving of the hedges to provide wider verges as part of the highway sightline requirements will in fact make walking in West Street safer. The on-site parking has been designed in accordance with Basingstoke and Dean Council standards and obviously meets those requirements for two-bedroom houses in this area, as the officer is mindful to recommend approval. There would appear to be no objections present from Highways, Landscaping, HSE, Office of Nuclear Regulation, Environmental Health, Environment Agency or Thames Water. Our clients have the support of a good number of immediate neighbouring properties. They've also received many favourable comments on the already constructed...
You have just 1 minute left.
Thank you. I've also received many favourable comments on the already constructed 4-bedroom property from many local Tadley residents, including adjacent neighbours. In summary, Mrs Perry and her family just wish to remain living together on the site they and their family have owned for a good number of years, and in the local area they've all lived in all their lives. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Members, any questions for the applicant? Thank you very much. Councillor Musson.
Thanks, Chair. I don't have a lot to add other than what's been said, and you've also got in the document my comments from the past. What I'd like to do is to explain some of the reasons for coming here tonight, is because I wanted to make a plea for the fact that in Tadley we do face restrictions on planning because of the ONR, and we need to see developments like this because, as the applicant said, we can't have a situation where families find themselves having to move out of Tadley because there are no development. Also, development like this does bring inward investment. The Section 106 provides a small amount of much needed money for community facilities and things like that. So it's really to bring to the attention of the committee that applications like this are important for Tadley, as I think some of my fellow Tadley councillors will know. I'm speaking for the whole of Tadley, not just Tadley South, where I'm a ward member. So that's the reason I'd like to give this application my support and why I've come here tonight. I don't believe some of the objections, particularly those from the Town Council, are that relevant because, as the applicant has said, we won't see a lot of traffic on that road. The other thing is that the ONR restrictions are a kind of a blanket ban. They just put a ring around the AWE. They don't look at the sort of individual layout of the roads and how many houses are there. So if you look at West Street, as I know it quite well, adding a couple of extra houses wouldn't create any problems with emergency evacuation, to be honest. And I think the ONR realise that, but they can't single out particular areas of Tadley and say, well, we don't mind a bit of development there, but we don't really want it in this other area. So it's a bit of a strange situation. And so as far as I'm concerned, we really need applications coming forward like this because it helps the families of Tadley and also provides some inward investment or encourages inward investment. That's all I have to say, Chair. Thank you.
Any questions for Councillor Musson? Thank you very much. Questions for the officers? Councillor Tomblin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a general question. The site plan, not the location plan, but the site plan that we've got in our documentation, and I saw it's the same one on the screen. Are you, as officers, happy with that? Because I can't tell where those houses are going to be located on that site, and there's ghosted houses that aren't in the red box, and all we have is a elevation of a street scene to give us some idea of the separation of the houses.
Just looking at it on the screen there, I can see that obviously the detail is much better on the plan that was actually submitted. Unfortunately, on these ones we do have the sort of slightly ghosted, as you can just about see on the plan on screen now, with the property that's been built to the west. Unfortunately, it doesn't always copy particularly well, I'm afraid, and we do try and get the plans in an acceptable state, but sometimes they just don't sort of pull through into the agenda items.
Sorry, just then, what is that red? A red box? What is the box on the screen then? Thank you.
The red line on that plan has been drawn on to represent the previous refused dwellings, which are semi-detached.
Yeah, if I can explain, the plan that you have in the agenda just after the location plan, so the location plan being the one with the red and blue lines indicated, the one after that, which is the one that's got the red line drawn around the previously refused scheme, is the layout plan. But unfortunately, as we said, the copying, if you like, hasn't come through. So the two properties that are now proposed haven't shown underneath that outlined previously refused plan, but that plan before you there on screen is the site layout plan.
Are you happy that we now know what we're actually being asked to approve, which is two separate dwellings? Did confuse me, I have to say, quite a lot. Any other questions, the officers? That was a very good question. No? Ward Councillor?
Chairman, this is a much better plan than the previous one. I think they've worked hard with officers or their architects to overcome any of the other previous previous refusal, and I have pleasure, not say great pleasure, in recommending it for approval.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think I feel for the applicants because it has been a long road for them, but what we've got now is something that really does work, and it is good for West Street. So it's been a long road, but I think it was worth the effort in getting there, and I would certainly support the new application. I would just comment, because somebody did, on terms of Tadley Town Council's comments. Of course, Tadley Town Council has this standard statement that says Tadley does not currently have the infrastructure to support extra developments. Well, perhaps they don't get out of their offices, but we do have schools, we do have dentists, we have roads, we have drains. So we have lots of infrastructure in Tadley. So they always make that comment, unfortunately, but there's no way to accept it, because, as I say, we do have infrastructure in Tadley, and we have a swimming pool even. So I'm happy to support that motion for approval.
Yeah, as you said, recommend it for approval. I think you meant to move it for approval. Councillor Leake, did you?
On words. Move the officer's recommendation.
We've had it moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour? That's approved.
The application is approved subject to the conditions set out in the report.
Move on to application number 3, which is Meadowview Rooksfield, and I don't have any speakers noted here. I note the applicant is sitting in the audience, but presumably doesn't feel moved to address us. No, she shook her head slightly. Officers would like to present the report.
Item 3 is a retrospective application for the installation of sink and toilet in an existing bicycle shed, erection of walls and a gate, erection of a dog kennel, and retention of a garden shed and installation of a gas tank. Members have visited the site, and there's a single update to the main report wherein reference is made to 6 letters of objection having been received, when this should in fact have confirmed that 7 letters have been received. The item is recommended for approval, subject to conditions set out in the main report.
Just as a comment, as I happen to be one of the ward members, the question was raised at the site visit by someone, why on earth does this need planning permission? And the answer is because it received approval as an exception site, the applicant being of gypsy background, and therefore it doesn't come with the normal residential, whatever it's called, or permitted development rights. So it doesn't have the permitted development rights, and therefore the applicant, unaware of that, went ahead and did some things that most people would be allowed to do until somebody drew it to their attention. But they can't do that. However, I think the walls might well be something that would require. Are the walls in this? Yes, they are.
Yes.
Which would require an application. So some of it does require an application in the normal course, and some of it only requires an application because it's not permitted development. Questions for officers? Have I asked that question? No? Anybody wish to make any observations?
My only observation would be that I'd be happy to move it, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Round?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of observations. I was concerned that when we took at the site address, it says Land At. And of course, I think most of us were surprised when we got there that there was a permitted dwelling, etc., etc. And you know, we don't normally all get time to read the full report before we go on the viewing, and you probably do that afterwards. So I would have thought that a better description could have been used to describe the site, because it is an authorised use for a dwelling. Moving on and looking at the concerns of public observations, and there's a number of concerns raised, but I took issue with the concerns about dog barking, because I have been a sufferer of that many years ago and had to move from my house because of it. So I think I'd make a comment that the applicant is aware that those concerns have been made, and they do their best to make sure that their type of living style is within the living community. Living community is not what we call a settled community, is taken in consideration. So with 3 dog kennels there, there could be some issues to always bear in mind, that there are other neighbours that perhaps barking dogs could upset. But having said all of my piece, I'm happy to support and second Councillor Tucker's motion.
I should also comment that I think the reason why there's quite a lot of objections to this are more to do with the history of this application, which was allowed to appeal against the views of the community. And so there's a sort of hangover there. I suspect that there aren't any serious objections to somebody having a dog kennel. The other thing is that from the external point of view, the members would have noted, visiting the site, that the proposed walls and gate would actually then almost completely conceal the residential aspects of the site and could be regarded as an improvement to the street scene. It's been moved and seconded for approval. Those in favour of approval? Against? That's approved.
Confirm item 3 has been approved.
We're back in. Tadley? No? 4 here. Oh, Borghurst. Borghurst, Tadley. Be very careful, haven't I, here? Oh, don't confuse these two, otherwise they'll get very upset. Postal address. I do rise, and my postal address is Reading. I hate to say. So it's Borghurst. I don't have any speakers. Officers, present the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Item number 4 is a retrospective application for a change of use of the land to a mixed use of agriculture and dog walking. Members attended a site viewing and a summary of the comments have been provided on the update sheet, and also clarification of the history of the site has been provided. Also on the update sheet are highway officer comments which were not available at the time of writing the report. The highway officer raises no objection and supports the recommended conditions that are contained within the main agenda report. Following on from comments and supporting information submitted by the applicant, which is also provided on the update sheet, it is recommended that condition 2 is revised in order to ensure the applicant can exercise her own dogs on the land as well as those that are part of the business.
Questions to the officers? Councillor Round.
Bound.
Bound. Oh, God, I'm dear. Okay. Oh. Thank you very much, Graham.
The night is but young.
No, speak again.
It's just a question. Page 44 of 58, the proposal, dog boarding business. Can I have the officers comment on that? Because I understood that there wouldn't be any boarding of dogs. That there would be no kennels.
Okay, where I've referred to the dog boarding, that's the nature of the applicant's business. She only boards the animals at her home. There'd be no dog boarding taking place on this site.
In the thank you,
Councillor Tucker.
Thank you, Chair. In the update sheet under the highway officer's comments, I just want to get something straight in my own mind. Conditions 3 and 4 are also recommended to ensure the use does not intensify from that which takes place at present, which could then result in more vehicle movements and impacts upon highway safety. I'm assuming that he's referring, or the highways officer is referring to condition 3, where I believe it says it's 1 round trip vehicle movement per day, maximum of 7 per week. Is that right?
Yes, in the update sheet, that's they're my comments that I've put in there. The condition 3 refers to the number of dogs, and so to limit that would then limit any intensification of the use of the site by having more more dogs on the site at any one time?
No, I'm afraid not. It's the more vehicle movements that I was referring to, not the number of dogs. I've got another question if it doesn't come up about that later on.
I think the idea being that when the application came in, retrospective application says a level of intensity, if you like, of the use as existing, and that's been described to us as 15 dogs on the site at any one time. Hence the condition is to try and limit that to that point. I think the comment from the highways officer, and I'm sure Mr. Pope will correct me if I'm wrong, is to say, well, if there's only 15 dogs, if it was an unrestricted sort of use, you know, any number of dogs come up, then we would have no control over the number of vehicles coming, and that could lead to a highways concern. So it's not saying that it would do, it's just simply saying that we would like to maintain the control over it so that we don't end up with that situation in future.
So what vehicle movements are we talking about? Because we understood from the site visit there was one round trip a day. Is that the limit?
No, there is, as I understand, the applicant has described that as what typically happens on a day-to-day basis. The number of I mean, don't get me wrong, in theory, you know, you could have 15 trips for each, you know, one for each dog, in theory. What we're trying to do is prevent it being, you know, I think it's unlikely, but what we're trying to do is prevent it being a completely unfettered permission. And the only way to do that is really to think about what happens at the site itself, as opposed to the number of vehicle movements that may sort of come to and from the site, which in itself we can't control. So the only thing we can control is actually what happens in terms of the use of the site. Hence reference to the number of dogs. And I think in all likelihood, it means that there will be a limited number of vehicle movements because of the number of dogs being restricted.
The reason I asked the question is, you know, when I read through this in detail after the site visit, that was my main concern, is having an unfettered number of movements. But one of the selling points for me from the site was there was going to be one round trip per day, because it's right in the middle of the countryside, and they didn't want to exacerbate the use of more frequent movements. But it seems to me we've now got no control up to the 15 dogs. We're talking about dogs now, not vehicle movements. It's apples and pears as far as I'm concerned. And I was going to ask whether the restriction on that round trip, because that's what the applicant actually briefed us on the site, that would be it. But it would appear from the officer's advice here that you don't mind 15 trips a day. That's what's concerning me.
It is exactly that. No, we don't anticipate there being 15 trips a day. In theory, there could be. In theory, there could be, you know, irrespective of the number of dogs, there could be other trips that the applicant may make to and from the site, which could have an impact as well. The point I'm making is that if it was a completely unfettered permission, then it's more likely that it could intensify over a period of time. But no, there isn't a control that you could put on to say there shall only be one vehicle movement or two vehicle movements or three vehicle movements. You can only really look at what's happening at the site itself and control the conditions, the uses through that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the update, and one of the concerns that was raised locally was regarding waste. This is a commercial operation, it is a business. It will therefore produce commercial waste. The site owner, I don't believe, has a waste license carrying permission, and therefore how do we propose to get the waste off of the site? Is that going to involve skips, lorries, etc., etc.? And I wonder whether you've consulted environmental health on these issues.
Environmental Health haven't commented on this application, but I think it's unlikely that large amounts of waste would need to be taken from the site given the number of dogs and the nature of the use. And in the update sheet, the applicant has talked about the how she would manage the waste on the site, or how it's managed at present. The waste is removed from the site on a daily basis, and therefore I don't think you'd need any large vehicles to do that with the amount of dogs that she's bringing to the site.
I hear what you say. I question: have environmental health been consulted? And I'm sure you said that they hadn't said anything, but it was just have they been consulted about the use? And it is commercial waste, and I can't take my commercial waste to the tip because I have to have a carrying license, and they would leave a license, and it will leave a situation that could lead to issues regarding the storage of that waste on site, which we don't seem to have considered. No, they say just ask that question. I think the answer is no. That environmental health haven't commented on those issues.
Councillor Tucker, then Councillor Potter and Councillor Bound.
Mine's just a sort of theoretical thing, really. Or is that bad? As I understand it, and we all saw it there is the fence around the larger bit, the blue bit. I think it's blue. And the fence is there because of what they do with the dogs. Quite understandable. But what I don't understand is why isn't the red line around everything that is affected by the use? So that's a technical question for you.
The area of land that's outlined in red is where the dog exercise is taking place, and the dogs don't exercise on the other areas of land, so they've only outlined that area where the change of use has taken place.
I mean, two things, Chair, if I may. I mean, in terms of the officers, presumably they have heard from the owner what I heard. I thought on the site visit that in terms of vehicular movements, I mean, the realistic proposition is that it's not in his or her interest to have 15 movements a day. I mean, the intention is to collect the dogs on a rota and collective basis so that those are kept to the very minimum and maximising the exercise time for the dogs when they actually arrive on site. So I know we can go into this in this theoretical model way, but the reality, I guess, is if they can keep it down to one journey, they'll do that. And certainly a very minimum number, that's the way they're going to operate the business, and that's what we heard from them. The other point I just wanted to make the comment on, coupled with the question, but in regard to all this issue about commercial dog waste and the like, I mean, I'm not sure we actually make the same sort of conditions when we're talking about equestrian use, are we? Because one thing that's an obvious comment is dogs make a lot less waste than horses, I guess. And we're going to reflect on this in terms of our discussion about what the land was ever used for. Well, it's a matter of debate, isn't it, how useful horse waste is when it comes to the land, but it's clearly going to be a lot less that the dogs are going to deposit, I guess.
I'm not sure there was a question there, but anyway, officers are showing no inclination to jump forward with an answer, unless you are. No? Councillor Bound. No, yes. There was a question sort of embedded there, but I don't think it's one for officers. My dad used to send me out after the milkman's horse, so that shows how old I am, for his roses, so there was some use in those days, and none of it ever went to any tip. Councillor Bound.
Yeah, just to follow up on the dog waste bit, the officer read out part of the comment in the update sheet, but not all of it, in that she missed out the bit currently removed. So I presume that what she meant was it's going to be continued to be, should this application be granted. Is that right?
Yes.
There were no other questions. Any discussion points, Councillor Brown, this time? Bound. Which one of you? No? Right, Bound. Bound forward.
We're bound to get around to it, I suppose. I was confused when this application came in. I thought, why the need for a planning application for walking dogs? Of course, reading further into the application, it is an application for change of use and the running of a business. And this application has come about because local people were concerned and asked enforcement officers to investigate. And they were asked to investigate because of a large expanse of panelled fencing that went right round the site, and that's almost the blue line, the fencing. However, we're told that the application doesn't refer to the whole site. The application just refers to the red line. So the fencing, although they're there for the purpose of this application, isn't part of the application. I said I was confused the other night. I'm confused again tonight. So currently we have a field with stables and associated equestrian business buildings with an established use for keeping of private horses. This proposal, however, seeks to change the use of the large percentage of the field to a commercial dog training centre for up to 15 dogs at one time. The confusing point is that officers seem not to have questioned the facts that have been submitted with the application. It alludes to one vehicle visit a day. It alludes to up to 15 dogs a day. It alludes to one trainer. One vehicle, one trainer, 15 dogs. How can one vehicle accommodate 15 dogs? It can't, so we've already said that there probably will be more visits. How can one person safely manage 15 dogs? One at a time. So the dogs are going to be stored in the van or kennelled in the existing buildings. Well, the existing buildings have been left out of this application. They currently have a permitted use by default of equestrian, but now they've been alienated from the site because you can't use them. So we now have these redundant buildings on part of the site that can't be used for their lawful use. So what we've done is we've set this plot up for agricultural. It's viable as an agricultural plot because what's left can't be run as a viable agricultural enterprise. If you look at the site viewing, when we went on the site viewing, we saw pallets floating in mud and water because the site's become very boggy, and that's the access to the dog training area. That's going to put massive pressure on hard standings. They're going to have footpaths. They're going to have hard standings for these dogs. They're going to have a hard area because within a short period the site's going to become pretty muddy with constant use. Different with the horses because the horses are mostly in the buildings in the winter and just come out for a small, and they can put them in different areas. But this is a confined area on the site where the training will take place. It's going to bring about a complete imbalance. If we walk on the public right-of-way, nice view across a number of open fields. Yes, these open fields have been separated, but the character and use is that of equestrian horses. And suddenly we've taken one plot in the middle of that open view and changed it by erecting a large expanse of fence and then allowing a commercial business that has no rural amenity benefit to that area at all. These dogs are coming out from Reading. They're travelling all the way from Reading into a small field within Borghurst for their training needs. So it is going to upset the character of the area. Massively so, as I say, from the public right away. Existing scene was open fields with equestrian use. Now we alienate this field from the rest of the fields and compromise its future use by giving it these change of use, which is agricultural and dog training. And as I say, the existing buildings now become redundant because they can't use them for horses. They've got no other authorised use. They're just going to sit there, probably be used for other things which are not authorised. The concern from the parish council was a number of things, and one of their concerns is that this is a route used by many walkers, riders, both horse and bicycle, and it's a sort of forms part of a quiet round route for the people of Tadley and Borghurst, and adding a commercial business to that very, very narrow, poorly maintained lane will just put pressure on people to have to run on other roads and use other roads which are much busier. So the parish council have been fighting hard to try and ensure that this quiet rural area stays rural, and you can read their village design statement that quotes that particular road, that the fact that it is a quite rural area and that's how they wish it to stay. Bringing in commercial use is not going to support the rural community whatsoever. And I think, having listened, I would strongly ask members to consider a refusal of this application. It's in the wrong place, and from that I would wish to move refusal.
Before you speak, can I just remind members that it is a rule of the committee that members, on each occasion they speak, limit their comments to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I think I shall be within the 4 minutes, even if I do wax slightly lyrical to start with. On Monday, I was in Bishopswood Lane, not a million miles from Violet Lane, where this application is situated. And I noticed with pleasure some cows grazing and thought, what a wonderful pastoral scene that was. Often there are horses in the field, but the presence of cows made all the difference. Much more natural somehow. It also occurred to me, as it often does, that cows mean milk and meat, vital foodstuffs. Unfortunately, so much land around Broadhurst seems to have been given over to grazing horses, presumably because local farmers can't make the farming of cows and sheep and crops pay, and so they diversify all they have to sell. Now, I happen to believe that our countryside should be producing a lot more of its own food and not relying on cheap imports. Thus, I'm saddened to see that land that was previously put to good use producing food is having to be given over to other uses. The Violet Lane application that we are discussing here used to be used for food production, was then given over to horses, thus the stables on this site, and now we have an application for the exercising of dogs, apparently still an agricultural use. The applicant is prepared to bring up to 15 dogs all the way from Reading, I believe, for a couple of hours exercise and then to return to Reading. I ask myself whether this is a good use of the land, and at the same time I do accept that they will be keeping a few chickens and grazing a few sheep. But is this really sustainable? Views from the road and from the two adjacent rights of way have been largely obscured through the erection of substantial lengths of fencing, apparently to allow the dogs to be exercised unobserved and for the dogs themselves to be free of outside distractions. Unfortunately, this is extremely detrimental for walkers and casual users of the lane, in that it has ruined the views over what was largely open countryside. However, and unfortunately, in saying all of this, I can't see, and I stand to be corrected on this, why this application shouldn't be approved. And whilst I would like to support, and in fact I will support Councillor Round in moving it for to be refused, I'm hoping that the committee can come forward with some reasons for actual refusal in this situation.
Before Councillor Round comes back, get in there. Are there any other speakers? Councillor Potter.
Well, on a personal basis, I'm disappointed to hear Councillor Bann at the end of his contribution making the point that he did, really. I thought he was with me on the day when we saw the site, reasonably relaxed about the proposal that we had in front of us, really. And I mean, obviously I see on the update note, I mean, there is at least some doubt about the sort of historical equestrian use of the land. And the sort of contraventions in regard to permissions or not that have been given, I think, is certainly questionable from what I read from officers. And therefore, those sort of established rights that we're saying are now being changed, I think, are somewhat debatable. I must admit, I mean, on the visit that we had, I've struggled really to find some of the logic in the arguments that have been advanced here this evening by Councillor Rand, really. I thought that it was a fairly neutral application in the sense that, dare I say this, I think the people who are running, and it clearly is a commercial venture, so be it, I mean, most things have to pay for themselves, also had a social conscience in the context that they were working with the RSPCA, seeking to provide support for a group of animals, dogs in this case, who were in need of that type of therapeutic support, literally, and they have to be exercised somewhere. It may seem a reasonable distance to bring them from Reading, I accept that, but I mean, I guess these sorts of areas of land where they can be exercised in that way without disturbing the public over much are probably few and far between, really. In regard to the fencing that's already been erected, my understanding is that didn't require planning permission, you know, the actual screen fencing, and therefore there is no disturbance in that regard. I mean, I'm sure there'll be people tonight who can wax lyrical on the historical use of land in the countryside and the equestrian use, but that, with respect, I think is not an issue for us tonight. This is a very straightforward application in regard to a use that is currently existing. I can see no real conflict in terms of the impact upon the local community. And in regard to the vehicular use, I've made a point about that. I mean, I accept in principle you could have 15 journeys a day backwards and forwards. I don't believe that would happen, and certainly in terms of the commercial viability, it wouldn't make sense. And I think that can be dismissed. We heard from the owner that their intention is to try and create this into something more than just this, what I call intermittent use of the exercise profile here, and actually establish some other animal activity in the way of keeping chickens and other farming animals, and I think that's to be commended as well. So I certainly wouldn't support refusal. In fact, just the opposite. I would be voting in favour of this application.
Are there any other speakers before I ask Councillor Round to come back?
Tucker.
Councillor Tucker.
One thing that I don't know how long they've been doing it. It's retrospective, but I haven't actually picked up on how long it's been going on for, and how many complaints as a result of what has been going on there. Does anybody know that?
To my knowledge, it was brought to the enforcement team's attention last year, probably about mid-year, about June or July time, but that's not 100%, but it's been fairly recent. It's been brought to our attention, to my knowledge. I might be wrong.
I know that residents and the parish council have raised concerns to enforcement, yes, and are raising concerns about this application.
The speakers, I'm going to ask Councillor Round in particular to provide reasons for refusal, because if we have a vote on refusal, which we have before us at the moment, we need to know what the reasons are, policy reasons for refusal.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points first, though. The fence, which is a large expanse of fence, which is completely alien to the countryside location, has come about because of the need to stop the dogs from seeing the horses and the horses from seeing the dogs. So whilst it's not in the application site, it's there for that specific reason, and I find that difficult to accept that we can't consider the boundary treatment of the application site because of the way it's been set. The application site, in fact, has no authorised access. We're giving the piece of land in the red change of use, but we're not considering access to it at all, because there's no, that bit of land outside of it is all agricultural. So they have no access to the commercial use. I do take issue with a councillor that doesn't own his own pair of Wellington boots, making comments about the countryside. You know, learn about.
Hold on. Every member is allowed their opinion, and some of us might take exception to what's been said about horses in the countryside. I will in a minute.
Okay, I've said what's said. The idea of introducing a few with this animal and a few of that animal, which are really close to, you know, the scenario of pets, adds to further domestication of the character of the site. It will make the site.
No, sorry, you have had a very long speech.
Yeah. I'm responding in the debate. I'm responding in the debate to some points that have been made, Chair. So I'll just make that point.
You run the risk of being repetitive, but what I really do need to have is reasons, policy reasons.
I haven't
for
made
refusal.
the point on domestication. I've made that point now. Thank you. Thank you. The application of the change of use of these fields will harm the open character of this open countryside area. It will lead to more vehicles using the narrow lane, so access is poor, and it will create a domestication of the use of or character of the site.
Any other speakers before I put it? Yes, Councillor. No, Councillor Barnes. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I thought that seeing that very nice fence reminded me of the countryside. I thought it was great. What's wrong with that fence? I thought it was great. Lovely little fence. You know what I mean? Where there's all the wicker. I don't know what these fences are called, but they're all woven together.
There's been reference to panel
What are they
fencing. I think the issue was reference to what was referred to as panel fencing, which didn't appear in any of the photographs.
Yeah,
I don't think.
You're as bad as me. You've got no Wellington boots either.
Oh, I've got some Wellington boots. Yeah, I've had them for 40 years. Yeah, no, I thought that was very much...
You run the risk of turning a short meeting into a long meeting.
Yeah, but very much an aspect to the countryside. Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin.
So very quickly, Chair, just could the officers just remind me the fence can go up without planning permission? Did I hear that? Sorry.
Yes, the fence up to 2 metres in height can be erected without planning permission.
Councillor Bound again.
Just briefly, did Councillor Round mention the village design statement in his reasons? Okay.
But is there something in... Well, no, you can if it's a reason for refusal. I ask you to enumerate reasons for refusal. If you think there's something in the village design statement that constitutes a reason for, or contributes to a reason for refusal, that's perfectly okay. I haven't read the village design statement, so I can't tell you.
There is a comment here from the Parish Council, Chair, where the importance of non-division of open fields and the practice of constructing new entrances into existing fields is highly stressed. So they do actually mention, and following on from what Councillor Round mentioned about the access onto the site.
Yeah, I think the village design statement alludes to and follows up and says that the importance of no more changes down that lane because of the fact that some changes have gone on. Let's keep the use as it is. It used to be one field. It's lots of simple fields. Let's keep it one field, segregated for equestrian use.
I had a question which arose for officers. Assuming this were approved, and assuming that we're right in thinking that the change of use to use for horses is not legitimate, are we going to seek, assuming this were approved, or assuming it's refused, either way, are we going to seek an application for certificate of lawfulness on that? Is there some intention to pursue that? Or are we simply accepting that it's changed and we're not going to do anything about it? Councillor Watson.
As I understand, it's not something that's been brought to our attention in terms of it being a nuisance to anyone. That's not to say that it's clear it's still potentially unlawful, but it may be that over a passage of time it has obtained lawful status, so it's not something that we would actively pursue.
Well, it's mentioned in the report. I thought it was. We'll deal with that. Come back in a second. Keith.
Yeah, so having had several change of use or not, I share Councillor Bound's view that it's regretful to see the agricultural land being turned into horticulture. I've made the joke about Tesco salami many times, never realising that I was more true than I thought. But my understanding, I've been advised by this council's officers before that grazing of horses is an agricultural use and doesn't need change of use.
No, the point was that this actually appears to have buildings on the land which is keeping of horses, which does require change of use. It's amazingly the difference between grazing and keeping in planning policy terms, and there is significant difference in practice and in impact on the landscape and so forth. Again?
Just to clarify, the existing established use, there is no doubt, the existing tablet is the keeping of horses. It's not the grazing, it's the keeping, so it's already gone that one step further. And passage of time, unfortunately, because we haven't taken action, is way on their side. And that's the issue, that it is the accepted, and it has to be for us to use the accepted use is the question, and it's in question for the owner's private horses. It's never been a commercial equestrian use. It's for the owner's own private horses, and that is clear because we know the sites and all of the sites along there intimately. So that is the established use. The only thing the parish want to hold on to is to keep one use, and let's keep it equestrian.
Before I put it to the vote, I just wanted to, for the record, since we've had all this discussion about the use of land and horses, just for the record, the horse industry, if I can put it in that vulgar term, is a very significant economic contributor to this borough. Very significant. And in my ward, I can't speak for other wards, in my wards there's very, very large areas of farmland, as opposed to horse land, whose productive and profitable use depends on the horse, because they are the main providers in the southeast, possibly the main providers nationally, of high quality feed for racehorses, which is a very important agricultural activity. So those people who think that the horse on the land is damaging, it's a very balanced question. And clearly if a lot of agricultural area in a particular area gets converted to private use for horticulture of a private and domestic kind, that's quite different. But the horse shouldn't be blamed for the collapse of agriculture. The horse actually in our area contributes to the collapse to the sustaining of agriculture. So just be clear that it's not the horse that's to blame.
Just one point, you're absolutely right. Nobody has objections to the horse in the countryside, and we all support that. And for all sorts of agricultural, private and equestrian uses, what the concern is the overrun and the changes that those go around it. And many local authorities, especially some of the local authorities in special areas, have their own policies and guidance and advice, especially where it's grown up on the edge of communities as such, because suddenly the community thinks it's losing the countryside. So I think the guidance that you can see out there is very, very good in some local authorities.
Councillor, and then I'm going to draw this to a close.
Just briefly, Councillor, I don't think I can blame the horse.
I just wanted to make an observation that if this had been or is even approved, that one of the conditions is that it was a personal one, which is a very rare thing for the officers to actually suggest. I just wanted to make that point.
The reason being?
A, it's unusual, and B, it's one of those things that it can't go on to anybody else using it. It would be only for that one particular lady.
Sorry, but the policy reasons for that? I mean, this is a restraint on the person's ability to sell his successful enterprise to his next door neighbour. I mean, what's the reason?
Is it's a very exceptional thing. I think the officers could answer this better than I can, but it's a very exceptional thing for us to actually put it for one person's use only, and I think it's a good idea.
Well, apparently it's in a condition recommended anyway, so it gets there. Sorry, as it's already there, it would happen anyway. It's been moved and seconded for refusal. Those in favour of refusal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Make that. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Well, I will vote to support the officer's recommendation in that case. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. On the basis of this going forward for approval, could I ask members to seriously consider the condition which limits the number of dogs to 15, because it is impractical for one person to manage 15 dogs, and the report says that there's only one person doing this, and I would have thought a better number would be somewhere between 3 and 5 dogs.
It's I think within the powers of the committee. Officers will correct me if I'm wrong. There's no reason why the committee shouldn't approve it with a constraint placed upon the number of dogs if the committee is minded to agree to that. I don't think we have to leave it to the officers.
No, I wasn't. I was asking the members to consider the condition, asking them to consider the condition that's already there, limiting the number of dogs, which is 15, to reconsider that.
I'm sorry, I misheard you. I thought you
would be
said
a better number.
I thought you said ask the officers. Members, we heard. Well, can you make a recommendation as to how many it would be?
Oh, I said 5. Well, I did say 5. Yes. I said between 3 and 5, but I think 5 is a better number because that gives them.
Well, that's not a viable commercial operation. It wouldn't be worth driving from Reading, would it?
Chair,
well,
Chair, driving from Reading, you can't put more than 5 dogs in one vehicle.
That's sorry, that's a statement which people might disagree with. I'm quite happy to put a proposal to restrict it to 5 to the committee, but I suspect you might do better to have a slightly more flexible approach.
8 to 10.
Councillor Potter. With planning
well, if I can just quickly say, I mean, all I ask the committee to do is to be fair and objective on this all the way through, and it's been a feature of the application. The applicant has been talking openly about 15 or 16 animals being the basis of their operation, and we've discussed it, I think, on that, had this somewhat academic debate about whether it could even result in 15 journeys to and from the site. And I think we've made our judgment, I hope, I certainly have, on that basis. And suddenly to impose an unrealistic and I guess non-commercial restriction of something as low as, well, we started off as 5, moving up to 8 or 10, I think is just unreasonable in the circumstances, and I think is, well, quite frankly, dishonourable, really, in the way that we've approached this discussion tonight.
Would you like to just consider your use of the word dishonourable? I'm very sorry to hear that. We have a...
Let me come back. I mean, if it's a point that you, in terms of the use of words that I probably, use on occasion, if you like, I'll withdraw that. All I think is that it's not in accord with the type of discussion that we've had earlier in regard to this application. Perhaps I could leave it at that, Chairman, with your agreement.
Yes, it is the case, not normally on minor applications, it is the case that views on planning matters become heated, and strong views are held by communities and by board members and others, parish councils. And I don't think we should confuse having strong views with motivation. I'm confident that all members here have spoken this evening and do usually speak from the best possible motives and in what they believe to be the best interests of the community as a whole and the borough. So I just don't want to have anything untarnished on the record that suggests otherwise, unless there's some really good strong reason for it. It's been proposed that the number be restricted to 15, to 5. Those in favour of that? No. I'm not going to go any further down escalating numbers and guessing at what might be the number, because it does seem to me extremely dubious that one can, sitting here, make any conclusions about it.
On page 47 of my report, which is taken from information given to me by the applicant, she suggested that usually she has 8 dogs there for exercise, but it does vary depending on the nature of the business. So that is a number that perhaps would be relevant.
I'm not inclined to do that. I mean, the thing is, what I've had in mind is if the application goes ahead, which it is doing, it's quite possible that from time to time there's a peak workload and the applicant has a friend who brings another vehicle to the site with other dogs. I mean, we can't make assumptions about what is and isn't going to happen. And I do think that it seems to me quite reasonable that this would come and go. If it turns out that there's too many vehicle movements to the site, I've no doubt somebody will raise this and it'll be looked into at the time as an issue for traffic and all the other things. The other thing which did arise in the discussion, I think officers should carefully look into, is to maybe through an informatory that the applicant may wish to consider whether the access to the particular part of the site that's proposed to be used for this purpose is sufficiently robust, and whether some hard standing and so forth is needed, rather than encouraging them to concrete the field, which I'm sure would get right up the nose of all concerned. You know how you handle that, but I'll leave that to you. Okay, so that is approved, officers? Right. Well, in that case, I'll propose in the chair that the application is approved as written. Can be seconded by somebody? Those in favour of approval? Those against? That's carried. We go on to Rose Cottage Dummer. Councillor Taylor's going to withdraw and join the members' rows. And come forward to speak, Diane, if you'd like to just come forward, because I think you're the only speaker. Is there a speaker? Oh, right, Mr. Perkins. Mr. Perkins? I do beg your pardon.
It's on the update sheet.
Yeah, I'm not looking, am I? Yes, as you. If you'd like to just sit at the chair there, and then when it's your turn to speak, you need to press the big wide black button. But before you do that, we'll have the officers present the report.
Item 5 is the proposed erection of a 3-bed dwelling and attached double garage. Just as a quick little summary on the history, there's been a number of applications and previous proposals for a replacement dwelling which have been refused and dismissed at appeal, principally due to the scale and massing of the proposals and the impacts upon the sensitive and specific context of the site. This latest application is considered by officers to once again fail to address these fundamental characteristics, specifically the relationship in the hierarchy of the buildings in the immediate locality and the scale and massing of the proposed dwelling and garage. 3 further letters of objection have been received, and they raise a number of new issues in terms of objections. In summary, the concerns refer to the scale and dominance of both the proposed dwelling and the garage and the resulting adverse impacts in terms of the visual character and setting of the immediate locality and the wider conservation area. An overshadowing of Down Cottage from the garage is also referred. 1 further letter of comment has also been received. In summary, it's a request for all windows overlooking Kingsley Cottage, the northern elevation, to be obscure glazed and a landscape condition be imposed if the application is to be approved. Highways have provided their comments on the application, and whilst noting the specific restrictions of the site, raised no objection on highway grounds, subject to appropriate conditions being attached in the event of a permission being granted. The item is recommended for refusal.
Okay, Mr. Perkins, you have 4 minutes.
Thank you. I believe the reason for this being referred here this evening is because the applicant has made every effort to comply with numerous planning discussions down the years. With all due respect for those that hold that opinion, I think if you read the planning officer's report, it appears actually that in fact the applicant has made every effort to compromise as little as possible when it comes to the numerous applications that have been made for the site, and that's the reason we're here today, X number of years on from the last successful application. Presumably in the hope that at some point, with persistence, one of them will sneak through. And again, referring back to the report, it's absolutely clear that advice has been consistently given for nearly a decade now, and that advice has not been given due regard. To turn to this application in particular, which is allegedly based on the successful 2003 application, which heartened me when I heard it, but then when you actually look at the details of this application, the majority of the elements that made the 2003 application acceptable have now been removed. So we're now back up to a ridge height of 7.8 metres rather than 7.2, which is incidentally actually higher than the application that was refused last year. We've now got an eave height that's back up to 4.4 metres when it was down at 3.7. We've now got gable ends rather than hipped ends, which is specifically against the village design statement with regards to properties that are situated at 90-degree angle to the road. And finally, we've got a large double garage rather than a single garage. So they're the points I'd like to make as points of differentiation between this application and the successful one in 2003. I'd also like to draw particular attention to the location of the garage and the scale, which and it was something that was picked on specifically in the unsuccessful application last year by this meeting. I note that the footprint is identical and the location is identical. We're talking about a reasonable sized plot here. It slopes away from the road, and it also slopes away from the immediately neighbouring listed and local properties of note. To my mind, a modest garage positioned further into the plot would be away from the immediate vicinity of those neighbouring properties. It would use the natural slope of the land to make it less dominant in terms of scale, and it would also be less visible from the street scene. Instead, what we have is a large double garage which is situated essentially as close as physically can be to Down Cottage. It's on the highest point of the site, and it's on the most conspicuous position. I can't see it. No attempt has been made to use hipped ends to soften the edges of the garage, nor of any, as far as I can tell, attempt been made to suggest a timber garage or carport style design, which is far more typical of the detached garages that have been built in the village in recent times. My view, and I think it's picked up in the planning officer's report, is that this application is another attempt to disregard consistent advice of planning officers and the fundamental concerns that they have raised regards height, bulk and dominance, in the hope that the committee essentially falls into the trap of saying, well, something's better than nothing.
You have 1 minute.
Well, my view is that actually better than something is the right thing, and if the applicant engaged with the planning officers in a meaningful way, and had done at some point in the last decade, we might be sitting looking at an application for the right thing, in which case I wouldn't be here, I'd be at home with my 3-month-old son. To grant this permission would undermine 10 years of absolutely consistent, crystal clear advice from planning officers and planning inspectorate. Just to pick out a few quotes from the officer's report, which states that this is overly large, fails to reflect attractive qualities, out of keeping, incongruous, contrasts sharply with character, and harmful. I therefore hope that the committee recognise that in a beautiful village and conservation area, the bar should be set considerably higher than something's better than nothing, refuse this application in the hope that the applicant then engages meaningfully with the planning officers to reach an appropriate proposal. Thanks.
Thank you. Any questions to the objector, Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just ask, gentlemen, where he lives in relation to this, and whether, how much effect it will have on it? That's all. So we've got a site plan. Oh, sorry.
I live in Down Cottage, so I would be the neighbour of the garage.
Very much. And we have Mr. Rose. You have 4 minutes, Mr. Rose.
I was in receipt of your letter, the 30th of August, which you asked the officers to send me, and in the second paragraph, or third paragraph, you are asked that I significantly reduce the scale, bulk of the various schemes. I can tell you that I have reduced this, the previous scheme that you saw in August has now been reduced by 30%. And the garage has been reduced from 6 metres down to 5.2 metres. The area of the garage is dictated by the highways, and they have set the footprint to the garage. The garage has been reduced by 10%. The garage is now in the position and size where the inspector said, and I'll quote this, I'm inclined to the view that the proposed garage on that side would not unduly impact upon the amenities of the neighbouring cottage in terms of outlook due to the boundary fence alongside and the roof slope. I will now go on to the actual thing. The cottage, I've seen 3 head of departments on this. Originally I saw Linehan, and she asked me if I would I explained exactly what I was doing, as it more or less what you see now, and she asked me if I would redesign the bay window to the dining room, which I have done, and and I wrote to her confirming that that would be done. I then later in June of 2007, I saw Mr. Giorgio from LECO, and he said at the time, he's talking about the approved scheme, which there is an approved scheme on this, which was done in 2003, which is extant, I believe. I understand that is still extant because I have started on the work. I demolished the cottage, I laid foundations, it was inspected by the building inspectors, and there is evidence of that. And Mr. Framelico said at the time, where is it now? It seems that the previous approved application was one acceptable in terms of design. That's what he told me then. So that was the approved design. Now I have now, in reducing the size of the I've reduced it down 30%. I've now reverted to the approved design. The approved design is more or less the same footprint as the cottage that I demolished, and therefore the bulk must be reduced in the same amount. So I've reduced it, so it is now more or less, well, it is the actual approved design. I have made amendments which I was asked for, and I will go through those with you. The siting of the cottage has been amended, and Mr. Framelico said on 1st of June, I do welcome the fact that you have moved the building away from the boundary. That's one thing he said.
You have 1 minute.
I also, Mr. Framelico said, after a meeting with my councillor, the basic he said the initial design should be based around the basic proportions of the extent application. He admitted there that it's an extent application, and I've done exactly that. The design you see now is the same. It is the approved design with amendments. So really what I'm asking, in effect, is to approve the amendments to the approve the amendments I'm proposing to the approved design. I'm asking for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you press your big white button, but stay there for a moment? Members, Councillor Potter,
Thank you,
Councillor
Chairman.
Watts and Councillor Bound.
If I may, Mr. Rose, could I just ask, I know this has been a substantial exercise for you, but in regard to just two matters really, in regard to the hipped gables, and I understand, personal choice and all the rest, so is there any practical reason why the gable ends can't be hipped? I'll ask the other question and answer both together really. Well, I need to complete my questions if I may really. And in regard to the double garage, I mean again in terms of preferential siting of your own choice, but again, is there any practical reason in a site of this size why that double garage has to be where it is, in close proximity to Down Cottage? It seems to me there are a number of other locations, albeit meaning that you'd have a slightly longer driveway to it, but why the garage couldn't be elsewhere in the site? I mean, is that the fact?
Regarding the site, this was a letter sent to me from George Framelico to Gary Taylor, and it was copied to Diane Taylor, and she gave me a copy of it. And it says here, you may also note, this is what I was instructed, you may also note that we have received advice from the highway officer. He has commented that since the previous application was determined, new parking standards have been introduced. Under these more recent BC residential car park standards, this site is now within the rural classification, i.e. no longer zone 4, and below link refers. Consequently, 3 car parking spaces needed to be provided. The garage also needs to be provided with minimum internal dimensions of 5.5 metres.
Sorry to interrupt, but I think the councillor's question was the location of the garage.
And the size, I understood. You asked for size and location. Sorry.
I mean, not so much about the size of the garage. Obviously, that you've already, I think, confirmed you done something in terms of reducing the scale of that anyway. But no, simply my question is, in a site of this size, where it clearly is causing conflict with one of your neighbours, and I'm not commenting on that at the moment, but it clearly is causing conflict, is there any reason, notwithstanding the last planning officer's comments about the need for parking provision on the site, why the garage can't be in a different location, less in conflict with the adjoining property?
Position that the committee felt when they first approved it. They thought that was the position for it, and the inspector thought that that was okay at that position.
So what's
Still with the garage, the extant application, is that for a double garage and that's fine?
Yes, it's for a double garage. Sorry. It's this double garage which I've been instructed to by the highways is required. Sorry.
The question was, is the extant application, the extant permission for a double garage?
It was the garage when the application there was for, find it for you. It was 6 meters, which is the same length, and it was 4.5 meters across. It's been increased by 1.5 meters to make it a double garage, which is required by the highways. Sorry.
Yes, I just want to clarify. So, one of the modifications to the extant application is to increase the size of the double garage. Does that bring it closer to the neighbour?
No, it doesn't. It's in the same side. It's been extended far into my land. It's exactly the same position. And my neighbour would have known about that when he bought the house 2 years ago, because this has been, when he did his searches, he would have known all about the garage.
My question has already been answered, Chair.
right? Any other questions for the applicant? Thank you very much, sir. If you'd like to withdraw, any ward councillor?
Just before you push the button. Just before you push the button, just tell you why I'm sitting here on this side of the table. Last year, when the applicant's wife passed away, sadly, and during his time of bereavement, I got to know him a little, and I really did want to help him to achieve his dream of returning to his family site, and this is the site of his old family home. So I've therefore had a bit too much involvement with consultation, etc., to be able to remain on the committee. But I now have the freedom to use my 4 minutes to explain why I do believe and hope that this application might finally succeed. Right, button time, thank you. Most of the committee members, I hope, will remember going on the viewing last year to this site. It's a large plot set back from the road by a fairly narrow drive, so it's fairly secluded. And as you may remember also, that the committee turned down by a majority decision that particular application, which was considered to be too large and bulky, and not address the inspector's problems. Looking at the size, I think Mr. Rose mentioned that at a meeting I had actually with the Development Control Manager then, he stated that he would like future applications to follow the proportions of the originally approved design. And I think that's confirmed on page 55 of 58 of our report, where the officer's report says the proposed floor area and layout of the current scheme is very similar to this previous approval. That's consequently, and as has already been mentioned, substantially smaller than the one that was refused last year. I'm actually really sorry that the owner of Down Cottage isn't happy, and I did visit the previous owner, and he said he would have been happy with the original design, and in fact the garage was in that position, and just to quote, the inspector said that the proposed garage, and that was in that exact position, would not unduly impact upon the amenities of the neighbouring cottage. And in a sense, we've got to go by something. So, we have to go by that. And I have to say, I don't know if you remember, but when we visited the site, there are no windows on that side of Down Cottage. So, anyway. So the size of it is very similar now to the originally approved design. 3 minor variations though, and I think these have already been mentioned, but I'll go through them 1, 2, 3 so that you know. The originally approved house was right on the boundary of Kingsley Cottage, and I think everybody has agreed that it is better just slightly away from the boundary. I've heard nobody complain about that. The height is approximately 0.4 of a metre higher. That's just under half a metre higher. This was to address an anomaly in the originally approved design, and this council said in its appeal submission, and I quote, "It made it difficult to access the main bedroom," and I understand that the owner of the house would have had to sort of crick his neck to get into. So that's the reason why it's just 0.4 of a metre higher. Gable ends versus half hips. For me, it is really a matter of opinion. If you look around Dummer, there are gable ends all over the place. Even on the adjacent house, there are gable ends, and that is a preference of the owner. And I think if people have got different preferences, you should probably go with the preference of the person who owns it. But anyway, I don't think probably I can say anything else that's going to be terribly helpful to you, because I think everything else has been said. Overlooking, once again, the planning inspector said that, to my mind, the distances involved, coupled with the opportunity for planting, will be sufficient to mitigate the perceived impact on privacy and seclusion. And I believe that the distance between the windows is greater than the 20 metres, which I think is our standard now. I'd be perfectly in agreement that there should be obscure glazed bathroom, but I do believe there's a minor bedroom on that side, and I'm not sure that it's reasonable to obscurely glaze a bedroom window. Most of our bedrooms look over somebody's garden, at least mine do anyway. Okay, right, I will sum up. You have heard that everybody has an opinion about this site. Every single application you could conceive of has drawn some criticism from some people, and then some people have subsequently liked the next one, and everybody has an opinion. I've had a variety of views from various villages and various officers, and I wish it was true. I know Mr. Perkins said that we've received crystal clear advice from officers. Well, officers specifically haven't been crystal clear because they don't want to dictate. But I must admit, in this particular report, the officer in charge on page 56 of 58 suggests this. One way forward would be to take an approach of designing a dwelling that would appear as a traditional dwelling, which had been extended over time with subservient extensions. Well, that is a little bit of a personal ideal, isn't it? But I don't think many people would want a house looking like that. So in a sense, what I'm saying is we've got to go with the best that we can do according to what the owner wants and according to what's suitable on this site with the hierarchy of the buildings. This goes right back to the size of the extant approval. And I believe that it does address the concerns of the appeals inspector and this committee last time we met, and I would ask the committee therefore to seriously consider now approving this replacement dwelling. Thank you.
Questions to the ward member? No, Councillor Potter.
And I hope it's not, Chairman, for the sake of it, really, I just wanted to get Councillor Taylor's comments, if I might. I know she's alluded to some of this in what she said, but I mean, the conclusion from the officers in their report couldn't be more critical, I think, really, in regard, and probably contradictory in a sense to the preamble you've given us, where the proposal is therefore considered to be unacceptable as a result of its scale, height and design, and the adverse impact it would have on the local townscape, which forms part of the Dummer Conservation Area, and the setting of nearby listed buildings and a building of local, I mean, very significant factors, I guess, in the context of Dummer particularly, as a location. Obviously, comment on that if you would, please. And secondly, I mean, in regard to this garage, which I know I keep harping on about, forgive me for this really, but I mean, it is a big garage, I mean, and there's no getting away from that. I mean, I take the point that's listed, I think, that it's 65% in terms of a footprint of the adjoining dwelling, isn't it, Down Cottage? So in comparative terms, very large. And I know what the planning inspector said about this. I mean, fortunately, she or he doesn't have to live next to the garage, but would you agree with me in terms of your discussions with the client? And I hope none of this is privilege, really, but I mean, there must be some discretion and some variation in terms of where that garage could be sited to avoid what is clearly a real concern of the adjoining neighbour, and that would help in part way, I think, to one of the major objections to this, wouldn't it?
Thank you. Yes, what you say about it appearing pretty damning, I think if you read the inspector's reports, they're not nearly so extreme as this. In fact, I think, I don't know, I can't say too much, but I think when you see what the officer would like, it's a dwelling with odd bits added on that looks as if it's been added on over different periods. So that it's a little bit subjective, and it may appear damning, but this is now very similar to one that actually was approved back in 2003, and it is of a size which the development control manager 2 or 3 years ago said that he would be prepared to consider. So, I mean, you know, I really can't say more than that. They use the words, and to be honest with the officers, they often use the word too much bulk, too much size, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, it's very difficult then to actually tease out of it exactly what's right and what's wrong. As far as the garage is concerned, as you've heard, a sort of modest single garage isn't what's called for because the highways evidently require a double garage. That's
sorry
part of it.
to interrupt, but I was going to raise this later. It keeps getting said the same thing. Highways don't require a garage of any kind.
Yeah.
If a double garage is to be built, highways specify minimum width of
Yes.
the entrances and the walls of the garage
Mhm.
to fit the cars, but they require parking. The highways requirement is parking. It's not for a garage. So we mustn't keep saying the same thing, because somebody will view the website and start making applications on the basis that the highways require garages, which they signally don't, sadly.
All I can do is quote a letter from the highways officer to the development control manager that says, and I quote, "The garage needs to be provided with minimum internal dimensions of 5.5 by 6." That's just quoting a letter, and you can interpret it as you wish.
No, I'm not interpreting it. I'm explaining. Officers will tell me if I'm wrong, but highways do not require a garage. If you're going to build a double garage, highways will, as they say in that letter, tell you minimum dimensions, or a single garage. They do not require you to build a garage, which is what's been said several times. So I just want to be clear, before we mislead anybody as to what highways really require, is they require, if you're going to have a garage, it must meet these minimum requirements, quite right.
Okay, just to answer the second part then of Councillor Potter's question, obviously on a plot this size, with a house this size, a garage is desirable in a village like Dummer, but yes, could do without it. I mean, I can't get excited about the position of it. I mean, it could be farther away, could be different. I don't know. I wouldn't like this to be refused just because of the garage. So if you've got something to suggest as a minor amendment to the garage, then please do, because I think this is probably the best scheme by far that we've seen for this plot, and it would be a pity if it was turned down just because of the garage and the position of it. Thank you.
Councillor Tomlin.
Thank you, Joe. Just a quick question. I saw a flash up on there, I think, of the existing planning application, and it showed a smaller garage, but it showed a tree between the garage and down the house. Now, it's not shown on this plan. Either I'm seeing things, do your local knowledge, could it tell me the tree's there or it's gone?
I'm hoping there's a voice from the back because I cannot remember where the trees are. Sorry, maybe the officers know. A disembodied voice has just said they're magnolia bushes.
I mean, just superficially, that does appear as if the garage is further from the boundary, but I don't think we could draw too many conclusions from that. question for the board member? No? Any others? Thank you, Diane. Questions to the officers? Yes, Councillor.
Just briefly, how far actually is the garage proposed to be from Down Cottage? I can't make it out on my plan. I mean, it's too faint.
If you can just bear with us, we're just going to check
Keep
that.
going. Any other questions for officers? They'll find that out. Or draw it down. Anything? Other questions for officers? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just one of accuracy that I think we all need to understand. It was mentioned several times about an extant planning application. Is it really extant, or is it approved? What is the status of the one that was granted?
Okay, as I understand it, there was a 2003 permission that was approved, that was in place. I think there's been subsequent debate whether that was actually ever implemented, and notwithstanding the statement made by the applicant now, we don't have any evidence to say that that permission was ever implemented, and therefore it would have lapsed by now.
We have the measurement. I'll come back on the other question.
In terms of the measurement for the garage from the boundary, it was set back 1 metre.
On the question of whether the original application is still extant, it could be quite significant. And I guess there are two ways of testing that. One is were all the conditions fulfilled, which should be on record. And is it the case that development had started? If development had started, maybe officers would guide us on this. I've always been under the impression that if development had started by implementing some aspect of it, like digging something, that then means that the permission remains alive, unless we've got some other reason to think something else. Perhaps officers could advise on that.
If development has started, either digging foundations or something of merit or material, then yes, that permission would have been implemented, and therefore it would still stand as a valid permission.
Sorry, Chair, I have read it. It's clearly in there, and officers do not accept that it's been started because it's in here somewhere.
Yeah. Yes, that's the answer to the question.
Sorry, Councillor Bound, you asked previously about the distance from the garage to the boundary. Was that in relation to the new scheme or the previous scheme? Because the distance we quoted, I think, is the new scheme. So a metre is the new scheme. Or were you asking about the original scheme, if you like? It wasn't you.
Sorry, the new scheme. And I can't make out what distance Down Cottage is from the boundary either.
They'll look into that and come back to us. And I would quite like to know what the distance from the boundary of the garage was under the old scheme, since the old scheme is purportedly extant.
For the old scheme, it was 3 metres.
We're waiting for one answer now. Any other questions to the officers? Yes, Terry.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a small point of information, really. Page 52 of 58, discussing the objections to the application. One of them suggests that the applicant has taken down a number of trees without permission. Do we have any information on that?
I'm afraid we have no information that would substantiate that or not.
I don't think it's germane to this, although it would be a matter for somebody. Otherwise, it would be the tree officer if there's trees with TPOs. Councillor Tucker and Councillor Goddison. These are still questions to officers.
Thank you. Yes, I just wondered if we could see the permission that was granted, the design of it, please.
Perhaps we leave that up for the moment. No, sorry, we had
Councillor
Councillor Goddison first.
Thank you, Chair. I do remember quite specifically when we visited the site last year that the applicant did tell us that he had started some footings. I mean, are the officers satisfied that he was misleading us at that time?
Round.
Thank you, Chair. It was just to draw your attention trying to ask that question. Page 58, the second paragraph, which refers to other issues, seems to say that it's been questioned a few times and officers still of the opinion that no proof has come forward to say that it's been started, so it hasn't been started, is their opinion.
And for the purpose of this meeting, it's deemed that it had not been started. It is still relevant to us, of course, because it's cited in the inspector's views, and it's cited in officers' views on the application. Was there another question we now know the answer to? There's some questions about heights that were quoted. Yeah.
Just to clarify, reference was made to the fact that the height has only been increased by 40 centimetres from the current proposal from the 2003 permission. That's not correct. My understanding is that the height is been increased by 60 centimetres with this current proposal. That's one of the main issues in terms of the fact that whilst various alterations have been made, the height of the property has been increased from that of the approved. It's also the fact that the gable ends have replaced those hips, which reduce that dominance. That's all part of the issues. And the 2003 permission in itself was a very generous permission in terms of the size and scale to the original properties, and it's somewhat that was very generous and provided quite a top limit, for want of a better phrase. And I think that's one of the key things that the applicant seems to be failing to address repeatedly in these subsequent attempts.
Discussion? Yes, Councillor Round.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to take some of the burden off of weight off Mr. Rose's shoulders in terms of we've referred to him a number of times as being the objection, and I accept obviously the concern of the garage there, but I would point to members that the parish council have made concerns about height, size, bulk, etc., and have suggested hipped roofs. So the parish council and of course the officer report is clearly making concerns. So it's not just the one concern, it's coming from a number of angles.
Councillor Tucker?
I'm very sorry for the local member, but I actually am going to move the officer's recommendation of refusal.
Councillor Round? That was seconded, was it? Oh, so have I. It's been proposed and seconded for refusal, which is in support of the officer report. Those in favour of refusal? Those against? That's carried. The officers, please confirm.
The application is refused for the reasons set out in the main report.
We now move on to Annex C, I think.
Paper C.
Paper C. Paper C is before us because signatories to a Section 106 agreement in connection with an earlier application have been very dilatory in signing it. And everyone, no doubt, will blame everyone else for that. It's obviously been something of immense magnitude for them to have signed this Section 106 agreement. But I understand it has now been signed, and therefore the application has come back to us because officers have taken the view that sufficient time has elapsed since the original decision to grant this permission that they are unsafe grounds if they simply go ahead and issue the decision notice without it simply being referred back to this committee to make sure this committee is content with the conclusions that it should go ahead. I think officers are recommending it goes ahead. But anyway, officers would like to comment, tell us why it's taken so appallingly long.
Unfortunately, Chair, that's the one part we can't really explain. Sometimes these applications do take a long time to get the legal agreement signed. On this one in particular, it's just a simple case that the applicant didn't sign it. There was ongoing negotiations between the two sides, and we couldn't actually get to the point of getting it signed earlier. We were never at a point where there was complete disagreement over the content of the legal agreement, so we didn't use the opportunity to refuse, and we thought that would be sort of obstructive in some ways to do so. The main issues in the report really set out the changes in planning policy that have happened since that time, including the MPPF. There's reference to the change in parking standards, and also because at the time of the original outline application, issues around biodiversity weren't so prevalent in planning, we consulted our biodiversity officer, who suggested that an additional survey work was done, and that was carried out. It didn't find any, it concluded that the site was of low ecological value, but said there could be some minor impact on breeding birds, so an additional condition has been suggested to effectively pull the recommendations of that appraisal into the permission as well. So it effectively just updates where the committee left the original approval.
Questions to officers? No, that's a discussion point you want to make, isn't it? Yeah. No questions? I was going to ask, who are the signatories other than the council to the Section 106 agreement?
I believe the applicant in this case was Hampshire County Council.
Right. Move to discussion, Ward Councillor.
Yes, Chairman, look at paragraph 1.2 on page 1. It says that the legal agreement was completed between the Borough Council, Hampshire County Council and the applicant. And information I have received, of course, says it's all the County Council's fault, and I'm sure we can all agree with that. But like another member, I phoned a head teacher today. I'm really surprised to find that the applicant, which is the school, didn't know that this was coming up this evening. And a couple of interesting things. The new conditions, the new condition is about the biodiversity report. I did ask for a copy of it to be available for everyone, and I found it outside with the coffee and tea. So if everyone wants one, it's now on that table. But it is true, it does say it's a very boring site, and the only thing that could possibly happen is breeding birds. No dormice, no reptiles, no... So the new condition isn't relevant. The reason for my wanting to be here to speak is that the key issue here is traffic, and I came to this committee in 2008 to support this at the very last minute. I changed my view because of, if you look at, unfortunately these pages aren't numbered, in Appendix 2, Condition 28, not to be confused with the conditions in Appendix 1, it's no development shall take place on site until a school travel plan indicated how it's intended. Yes. It's Appendix 2, at the top of a page, there's clause number 28, yes.
So you'd like to keep going then, Keith?
Right, the important issue here for local people is the traffic, and this is the second time this evening as well we've got a conflict between school and housing. Only in this case it's the school that's got permission to sell land for housing in an area where traffic at school opening and shutting times is absolutely appalling. And of course this councillor's landowner wants to make it much worse by allowing access to 200 houses along there as well. We'll put a stop to that. The travel plan is very important, but everything has changed since 2008, and I wanted
originally I was questioning because it seemed to me that the travel plan that's alluded to here has failed. But today my research has indicated that an equivalent travel plan is available, because the intention of the travel plan is that the parents bringing and taking away children won't have to use that entrance at all and can access across adjacent land. So I wanted to emphasise that, because since I dare say all the officers were involved in before are now heads of service and some other authority, to remind everyone that the travel plan has to be submitted and approved in writing, and it won't be the same one that was on the table at the time that this was previously approved. It also says travel plan shall be enforced by the school, but I think that's impossible, to tell a school they've got to enforce where parents drive, and shall be submitted to the council for annual review, and that is really important. So I'm here to support this, but to draw attention to that condition, which is going to involve work by the officers of this council, not only before the permission is actually granted, but every year. Annual review.
Just for clarity, are you saying that it's very important that it does have an annual review? If so, could you like to tell us why that's so important?
Well, I think it's because there's a lack of credulity attached to a travel plan. Because of that, shall be enforced by the school, and because it depends on an agreement for the children to go across the sports club land to the sports club's car park to be delivered, including the bus from Barton Stacey and various other things. It's a difficult problem, and best will in the world, it might not be right to start with, but if this development results in all the traffic there clagging up, then this council will, by its annual review, be able to sort it out, no doubt.
Right. I'm going to keep asking you questions now. I had picked up the strange thing that the travel plan shall be enforced by the school, which seems to me they can be responsible for the bit of it they own, which is on their land, but it seems to me impossible for them to enforce anything outside of their land on anybody. Is that the case? In which case it's not a reasonable condition.
I'm advised today that there is now a probability of a formal agreement with the sports club to make that access permanent. What you can't enforce is that parents drive a slightly longer distance to drop their children when the children then have to walk a slightly longer distance. This is a secondary school. They can be expected to walk across a sports field on their own, and so it's just about credible, but it needs an annual review. But I really think it's important that by putting this condition down, this council is committing itself to an annual review.
I'm still trying to be clear,
but I support
whether you think that's a good thing.
I support the recommendation.
With that condition.
Does it need moving? Oh, right. It's not actually a development control issue.
Test whether members have any questions for officers. No. Any members want to make any points? Councillor Hose moving for approval. Do we have anybody second that? Councillor Bound. See, I'm looking that way now, and it was him with his hand in the air. I got it right, you see, and I deliberately looked the wrong way. Any observations from officers on this strange question of how you enforce a school travel plan and what we think that means? Because I was going to raise that question anyway.
I think, Chair, in terms of enforcement of the actual condition, I suppose, as a whole, that's obviously an issue for the local planning authority. I think the point in the condition that's being made is that the school, insofar as their travel plan would be designed, would then be responsible for their part. So they would submit details to us, which would include details that they would be providing, and of those parts, they would enforce them.
Right. And somebody in here is going to hear in Basingstoke and Dean is going to do an annual review of it.
Yes.
Which is what we're requiring.
Yes.
Those in favour of it as a... Right, anyone against? That's approved. Well, thank you all very much. And I'm very pleased to say we nearly finished by 9 o'clock.
Anything you want to say to the Assembly after other meetings? Nothing you want to say to them?
Oh, just for information, there will be a message coming out about this. We do believe we have some impending large-scale applications approaching us. We will, depending on the scale of the applications, we will do as we've done in the past, which is aim to have them at a single meeting so that there's nothing else on the agenda that time. That does mean we could get congested, and officers will be putting forward suggested list of alternative dates for additional meetings. The other thing is to remind you that with effect from last week, based on your earlier decision, it is open to any councillor now to ask that an application be subject to pre-application engagement. Officers can then offer it to the applicant. The applicant does not, of course, need to do so. There's no way we can coerce it. But just in case anybody sees anything coming which is on that sort of scale that we're talking about and wishes to ask for it to go to pre-application engagement, you do need to ask for that. It's not automatic. Okay? Keith?
Ask a question on that. Will that slow things down?
Officers will answer that question.
It shouldn't do. I mean, the whole point of pre-application is to provide, decent comment before the application comes in. It should actually speed things up because there should be less issues to resolve at the application stage.
Yes, in theory, there should be. We as the members of committee should have less things to discuss at the meeting, although that won't stop, of course, members of the public and board members from having lots of things to discuss at the meeting. Okay, thank you all very much.